Hello there and welcome. In this lesson, we will learn about conditional logic. What is conditional logic? It's basically how to add decision making into our code. This is a very important thing in programming, and without it, our code wouldn't be useful at all. Because we can never know what will actually happen when the code is executed. There are things that are out of our control, like user input that can change. What if the user inserts a wrong password? We need to tell the program what to do in this situation. Maybe we want to show some kind of error message. The idea is very simple. We provide a condition, some kind of check. Is the value bigger than another value? Is the value equal? Is the value true? We learned about expressions in the previous lesson. Each expression can have a value of true or false. This is where these expressions are useful. We can use them as conditions. This way, we can let the program know what to do in different situations. The most common way of using conditional logic in C# is with the if statement. To create an if statement, we simply type in the if keyword, followed by these parentheses and curly braces, and we know that curly braces are basically a block of code, so we can insert some code to be executed over here. And the condition goes inside of these parentheses. And you can see that it's very intuitive because you can think about it as if something, then do something. If age is bigger than 18, then print you are an adult. Obviously, we also want to create this variable. So this right here is the condition. This is the check. And it usually comes as an expression. Because even though we can check different things with expressions, the final value will be either true or false. We cannot just add some kind of value like a number inside because it will tell us that it needs to be a bool. So this if only accepts bools. It only accepts true or false. So even if we want to check if an age is bigger than 18, the value will still eventually be true or false. And this is the way we check these conditions, if it's true or if it's false. Now, this doesn't have to be a full expression. We can also actually add a bool. And this way, it's more clear what we are checking. We are checking if it's an adult. And if this will be true eventually, then it means that this condition is true and it will execute the code. If this will be false, then this will be ignored and the program will just continue on, right? We learned that the program is executed line after line, so it will go to line 1, 2, 3, 4, then it will reach this check. It will check if it's true. If it's true, then it will also execute this code. But if this is false, it will ignore this entire code and it will simply continue on. So we can also add age is bigger than 18 over here. And we learned that we can store the value of the expression inside the bool. And then when this will change, and then this will change, and we can get the result. So imagine it's some kind of application or maybe website, and we want to check if the user is over 18. So he will input his age, and then we're going to get this age. It will be saved inside, and then we can basically check it and let him log in into the website or the program. Or maybe we want to give him some kind of message that will tell him that he is not an adult. But in our case, it will only run this code. If this is false, so if he is not over 18, the code will simply continue on and it will ignore it. So how do we run a different code if this is false? For this, we have something called else. So with this else, we can execute a different code if this is false. So think about it here. If true, if false. So if the condition is true, then we're going to run this code. But if the condition is false, then we're going to run this code. So this will be ignored and only this will be executed. If this is true, only this will be executed, but this will be ignored. And then it will simply continue on with the rest of the program. Maybe we have some kind of program ended. So this will run anyway, right? It doesn't matter what is the result of the check. It will still continue and it will run this code over here. Now, we also know that with these expressions, we can have more than one check. We can add more things with this AND or operators, right? So we can check multiple things. For example, is new user. And then it will check this, and we can see that it's true, and then it will check this, and we can see that it's true. And if both of them are true, because AND operator will check if both of them are true, and if both of them are true, then this entire expression will be true, and it means that this check is true, and it will execute this code. If one of them is false, then this entire thing will be false, and then it will execute this. And we talked about all of these combinations in the previous lesson with all of the different operators that we can use. And of course, we can also add more and more conditions, but all of them will still execute the same code. So we want to have multiple conditions to execute the same code. But what if we want to execute a different code based on a different condition? Of course, we can create another if over here, a new if afterwards, or we can use something called else if. So with else if, we can provide another condition and basically run a different code. So maybe we are checking if it's an adult over here, but we also want to check something else. For example, maybe we want to check if the user is an admin. Because maybe if it's an admin, then it will log him into a special place. And then it doesn't matter if it's a new user, it doesn't matter if he's an adult, or maybe it makes more sense to first check if he's the admin. And if he's the admin, then obviously we want to do something else. But if he's not the admin, then we want to check if he is an adult. And if he is an adult, then we can log him inside. You can log in. So it's like a chain of conditions. It will first check this one, and if this one is false, it will check the second one. And if this one is true, then it will execute this code, and then it will simply continue over here. Of course, we can add more and more of these conditions, and it will basically check one after the other. If it will find that one of them is true, it will execute the code, and then it will skip the rest, and it will continue. So it will only check which one is true. It will skip all the rest. And this is useful, for example, if we have a situation that we want to check different scores. Maybe we have some kind of score 85, and then we want to check if score is bigger or equals 90, then your grade is A. But what if it's not above 90? What if we want to check if it's above 80 to give it a different score? Then we cannot just add another condition over here, right? It doesn't make any sense. We can check another thing over here, and this time we can check if it's over 80. So if it's over 80, but it's lower than 90, then we can simply give him a grade of B. And then we can do this again and again with 70. And eventually, if all of them are false, for example, if we have, let's say 55, it will check this, it will see that it's false, it will continue, it will see that it's false, it will continue, it will see that it's false, it will continue, it will see that it's false. So if all of these conditions are false, then it will default in this else, and it will execute this thing. Okay, so this will basically run if all the other conditions are false. And this is useful especially when we want to check different ranges, maybe age ranges or time ranges and things like that. Now, when this is not the best approach, for example, if we have some kind of, let's say, Pokemon, and I hope you know what a Pokemon is, otherwise you are too young. And let's say we have this Pokemon Charmander, and then we want to check the name. So you would think that we can just do something like this and we can compare this variable. Of course, it needs to be a string. We can compare this variable with a name. So if the Pokemon name is Charmander, then we can say this is a fire type. Else if then so we can obviously use it like this and check what is the name and compare it to this one, and if it's not this one, it's this one. But this is not the most practical way. For this, we have something else that is called a switch, and this is also something we can use as part of conditional logic. So we simply type in switch, and this is useful when we want to basically check some kind of values. For example, case Charmander, and then we can run some code. Now we don't have these curly braces here. We simply add the code over here, but it works the same way. And then we need to add this break, and this break basically means that it will break outside of this switch and it will continue on, because we can have more cases here, and usually we have more cases. So a switch is more useful when we actually want to check a value and not create some kind of expression, because we cannot add an expression inside. This is something that is used to basically check a value, maybe a string, maybe a number, maybe other types, but then it will basically go over all of these cases and it will check which one is correct. And because we use this break, it will run the code. If this is the correct one, it will run the code, and then it will break and it will skip all the rest of the cases and it will continue on. So usually we also need this break here, and this is the way a switch is constructed. Now, sometimes you're going to use a switch, other times you're going to use an else if. Sometimes it will work with both of them, but over time you are going to understand what is better, because this is cleaner, right? It's cleaner. You have different cases, different Pokemon. With the else if, you don't want to have a lot of them. You just want to check some kind of range, maybe a score range or something like that. So it's not critical, but eventually you're going to understand the difference. Now, another thing to mention with this switch is that we also have to add this default case, and the default is like the else that we had. So if all of these cases are not going to be correct, then it will result in this default, and then we can say and also break. And this is a way a switch looks like. Of course, I only wrote one line of code, but you can add more code inside and it will execute all of this code. So just imagine we have this. There are a lot of situations where we don't use a block of code like this, but it's still a block of code. And even if we do if, we don't really have to use this block of code. We can simply do something like this. If So you may think that this is not related to the if, but it's actually a part of the if. So we are not specifying these braces here, but it's still a part of the if, and we can also do else like this, and else something else. Now this may be a bit more confusing for you because as a beginner it's kind of unclear where you should put everything, but it's totally fine to use it this way, so you don't always have to specify these braces. You can even add this over here and it will still work, so you can do this very short like this. And this is an if else, so it will work the same way. If something, then do this, else do this. So these are shorter ways to write this, but of course if you have multiple lines, then this is not the best way. You should add these braces, and then you can add more code inside of these braces and have a full block of code. Obviously, later we're also going to learn about methods, and then you can simply create a method, and then it will run this method if this is the condition. So the method will be a separate block of code that will be executed. This is also possible, and we're going to talk about methods later on in this course. But the idea is that we have this if, we have a condition, and then we have some code that will be executed. And if this is false, we can also have this else. And we can have braces, we can use it without braces. And you are going to see that it can be even more complicated over time. We can have ifs nested inside ifs. We can have ifs nested inside else. And nested simply means that we add ifs inside of ifs. Because maybe here we want to check if the age is over 18, but then we also want to check if new user. So we first want to check something over here, and then we want to check another condition only if this condition is true. Because what is conditional logic? We basically point the code where to go. So it starts in the first line, it goes over here, and then we tell him if this is true, then simply go into this block of code and start running here. Now, if this is true, then go into this block of code and start running here. If this is not true, then skip all of this and go to this block of code. If we don't have an else, then simply skip this and continue here. So it's all about telling the code where to continue, right? We want to let the code know what to do in different situations. Should it continue with the program? Should it go into this block of code? If this condition is true, should it go into a different block of code? And when this block of code is ended, that will obviously continue here, still inside of this block of code. Maybe we have something else. Let's say we have else inside. So this is a new user. Because here we check one condition, if the user is old enough and if we want to allow him to log in. Then after we check this, we want to check another thing that is only relevant to this first check. If this first check is false, then we are going to skip all of this and do this. But if this is true, then we're going to go inside of this block of code and we're going to execute some other code. Now it can be just random code, or it can be another if. And of course, we can even add more ifs inside. Now, nesting, adding ifs into ifs is fine. It will not break the code, but it's something that we usually want to avoid because it can make the code very messy. Imagine you have a lot of ifs and else ifs inside one another. So it will be very weird and it will be very confusing and you will start losing track of what the code does. So usually we try to avoid doing this, but if you really need to, it's totally fine and you can add ifs inside of ifs. So this is basically the basics of conditional logic in C#. We always use this if to check something. We can also add else to have different code run if this is false. We also have else if, and we have switches to usually compare between values and things like that. Now, there is something that is a bit more advanced, but I still want to cover this because if you ever run into it in a different code, then I don't want you to be confused. So you don't have to use this, but it's something that does exist. And this is just shorter way to do an if statement, and it's called a ternary operator. So imagine you can do something like this. If age is bigger or equals 18, and we can have some kind of string here, result. And maybe this string is empty right now. Maybe at the beginning it's empty. But then if he is over 18, then we're going to set the string to be adult. If he's not over 18, then he is a minor, right? So there's nothing new about this. It's something we learned before, right? There's nothing new here. We have an integer, we have a string. At first the string is empty, but then we can set it a value over here or over here. So these are different strings. And if it's over 18, then we're going to do this. And if it's not, then we're going to do this. Okay, so far there is nothing new. This is what we learn. But with this ternary operator, we can basically turn all of this into a shorter way. So we can basically do something like this. Age bigger equals 18. And then we can add this ternary operator. So this is the actual ternary operator. And it's basically like having a condition and then saying if it's true, then do whatever is inside. And then we have this colon, but if it's false, do whatever is here. And this is the format: condition, if true, and if false. So in our case, this is the condition. We can see that we have a condition here. Then if it's true, then we are going to set the string to adult. And if it's false, we're going to set it to minor. Now, obviously, we cannot just do this because there is some kind of result, right? The result is one of these. So we need to set it into this string. So we can simply say string result, or because we created it, result. So we have all of this, and think about all of this as this if. So it's like packaging this entire if into an expression, and all of this becomes one line. And then we're going to set the value, which is adult or minor, and store it inside result. So this is exactly like this. There is no difference. The difference is that this is shorter and this is longer, but we're doing exactly the same thing. We have a condition, we have a result if it's true, and we have a result and if it's false. So don't get confused too much about this. This is just a shorter way, and we're just assigning this value for this string. We can do the same with, let's say, a bool. If age is bigger than 18, then we're going to set is adult to true. Otherwise, we're going to set it to be false. So this will be the value of adult if it's true or false. Again, this is optional. You never actually have to use this. This is just a shorter way. If you ever read some code and you run into this question mark and this colon, and then you will know that it's basically a condition, something that will happen if it's true and something that will happen if it's false. Usually it will be on one line and it will all be the value of what is on the left side. So that's all for conditional logic. Obviously things can get much more complicated, as I told you, and you will probably learn this the hard way when you start getting into real code. But for now, this is all you need to know. And as we progress with the course, we're going to use this even more. We're going to use this with methods. We're going to use this with other things. and it's going to be very intuitive eventually. It's not really a hard subject. So that's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.